Are business taxes an end of the year issue or an all year issue? We're talking about that and more today on Cash Flow. Hi, I'm Jason Waters with JW Financial Group, and welcome to Cash Flow, where we talk about how your business can make money, and keep the cash flow going. Today with us, we have Jon Levy, who started a very successful company and then ultimately sold it to a public company, and who used to be an accountant for other firms. So you went from the accounting side of the business to operating side of the business, starting your own company, ultimately doing what everybody wants to do is figure out the way to make some money and exit at one point.
So I was an accountant, and I graduated with an accounting degree from the University of Connecticut way back in the day, and spent some time in the technology industry. And I had a friend in that industry who told me about a business where he sold rocks and dirt. Ended up helping him out a little bit, and once I got into the industry and learned how to drive a forklift and started enjoying a little bit of that outdoor air, I realized that selling rocks and dirt was something I wanted to do. So, and that eventually led to me starting a company called Stone Forest Materials. And of course, that was when I also met you and became involved in your world. And you helped me out many times along the way as a friend and also, of course, as a commercial banker. And through many trials and tribulations over 15 years and ups and downs and going through the recession and financial collapse, we were able to eventually get to a point where we had a thriving business, and fortunately we were able to sell it to, like you mentioned, a public company.
So you had the financial collapse, and you also had a drought, which was also a big deal.
Yeah, not many people remember
business.
In 2007, before the housing market fell apart and the financial collapse after that, Atlanta was in the midst of what they called a level 4 drought. So, and being in the landscape materials industry, that affected our business tremendously. And of course, Pike Nurseries is an Atlanta institution, and at that same point, they went bankrupt. So just to put an exclamation point on the severity of the situation, leading up to what affected everybody, at least in our industry, we were greatly affected by the drought there.
So to reframe,
it's funny that you remember that.
I do. Reframe your background. You went from accountant, technology, hardscape materials, to ultimately surviving a drought, surviving a economic downturn, to ultimately
it's
selling
hard to
your
sum
business.
it up in a
That's
few
amazing.
minutes, but that's
that's an amazing story.
That's the story.
Okay,
and I'm sticking to it.
Excellent. Well, let's dive into some questions if we can.
We're opening a new business. What position should I hire first?
That is a great question. I want to defer to Jon on this because you have lived this for a long time.
So to handle the things that you need to do to start a business, which is an incredibly long checklist of information, right, of items, of tasks. So you look at that list and you say, well, I can, on my expertise in this business, I might be able to do all these things here. But then I recognize that I'm deficient in a whole bunch of other areas. So I'm really, it's not a cut and dry answer because, depending on what I'm, as an accountant and a background in accounting, there's certain things that I'm best suited for. And then I look at that bigger picture, the bigger whole, and say, all right, well, I need help in these specific areas. In my own instance, not only were we building a business from the ground up and all the things that you have to do from the standard getting your business license and business plan together and financing and all that, but we were also managing a construction project. We were doing our own construction. So, and that was an area that I certainly didn't have any expertise in at all.
Sure.
That's why we had a motto early on that said we do it right because we do it twice. That was not anything you really wanted to be known for. But that's my point. But I fell back at first, like I said, with admin and operations because those are the things that you really have to nail, in my opinion, coming out of the gate. If you're not well set up with a good foundation early on, you're going to struggle later because of that. Right. So, sometimes we call it doing the dishes or doing your laundry, just making sure your chores are done kind of thing. So if you're well organized it enables you to go and do all those things and execute the plan as best you possibly can.
Sure.
So
Yeah, I think you're exactly right on figuring out. Everyone has to have self-awareness, especially entrepreneurs, about what they're really good at and what they're not good at. And don't try to be good at what you're not good at. You need to find
it's
the right
funny
person.
that you said, because that's such a good word to use, is self-awareness, because we're all deluded a little bit anyway in
Sure.
terms of starting a business, and you have to have a little bit of a crazy gene in you to begin with, but to be able to look in the mirror and see and say to yourself, hey, I know I can do this and I know I need help here, is really the first step, when you're thinking to the next step, which is, who am I going to get to bring in here?
Right. And I'd say you're an anomaly, because most folks that start a business, they don't necessarily have the accounting piece. So they almost always have to get someone to do their books, or else they try to do it themselves and it ends up being a mess. And then we come in and clean it up. But
You've seen that so many times, exactly.
Exactly.
So,
and then it's on the right track, and like, oh, I didn't realize life could be so good.
Right.
But it's usually operations or business development is where people
Yeah.
come from, and so you got to figure out.
Well, eventually I'm going to have sales. I'm going to have
Sure.
to bring in, I'm going to have to bring in revenue in order to start building and to survive. But like I said, you need to have the pieces in place before that, so you can operate in an efficient manner and be as productive as possible, and not, do what so many people are prone to do, which is scramble all day.
I'm interested in selling my company, but I'm not sure how to calculate its worth. Can you help?
You want to sell your company, you don't know what it's worth. Well, it's worth what somebody's actually willing to pay for it. So many entrepreneurs I see overvalue what their company is, because it's worth more to them, it's their baby. So really, we would take an approach of and first of all, the value is always driven by cash flow. There could be tangible assets that things are worth, but it's really driven by the buyer wants to know how much money they're going to make, and how much money are they going to make when your sister's cousin's not working there anymore, and they're not paying, all those other expenses are gone. And so, or, what's it like when they actually have the revenue that they should have? So there's a lot of pieces to that, but ultimately it really comes down, the worth comes to cash flow. And so we start with figuring out exactly what is that, and how do we, and then working with the business owner to say, how do we maximize it? Because what you want is to maximize your cash flow. So, John, what do you think about that?
Well, you already hit the nail on the head when you said it's worth what someone else is willing to pay for it. So if you don't have a buyer, it doesn't matter anyway. But if you actually look at some of the formulas used to calculate the worth of a business, and like you said too, it's cash flow. And in our case, it's EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, EBIT. And then a multiple of that, which is just, it's common that's how a business,
and every
across
industry is
many
different.
industries. But yeah, and sometimes if it's a real hot industry, you never know. It could be a value, which is a multiple of revenue.
Sure.
But usually it's really what the business is producing cash flow wise, and some kind of factor of that.
What can I do as a small business owner to better prepare for the tax season?
So first of all, I would say there's no such thing as a tax season. There's a tax season for CPAs in which they have to process the taxes. But in reality, what you should always be doing is what is good for your operations and what is good for your taxes, and balancing those two things. Example, I've seen people go buy equipment that they don't need to try to lower their taxes. If you're not going to make money on it, it's not the best idea in the world. So I would say you proactively are always having the conversation with your CPA, with your financial advisor. What is the ultimate impact, or what do I look like going into next year? And there are things I need to do now to be prepared for the future. If you're having an advisor that is not willing or doesn't make time to have those conversations, you need a new advisor. And I see that a lot as well. Not from just what we do, but from some CPAs out there. They're great CPAs, and there's some CPAs that just take the information you give to them and put it together and spit it back out and say, this is what you owe. So you need to work with people that are consultative and forward thinking. That's my advice on that. John, you being an accountant and business owner, what's your take?
And for the actual small business owner themselves on a day-to-day, month-to-month basis, it goes back to what I was talking about before, which is just being really organized. The last thing you want to do when deadlines are approaching is have to scramble to get information together and then hope that it's right. So being able to get ahead and stay ahead of the curve there makes things go a lot smoother, when the time actually comes. Because we all know we dread that as small business owners. there's a lot of things on that big checklist that you have to do every month and every year and every week. And tax season is of course one of the big ones. And it's easy just to file an extension and put it off until October, and that's fine too. But my point being is that, don't let it build up, because when you let those things build up, they tend to become, three-headed monsters.
Sure.
So slay the monster early.
Right. So I get this question a lot, and I answered it some, but I like your take. What's your take on someone says, hey, I want to buy this equipment this year because I'm trying to lower my taxes?
Well, it's everything is a buy versus, do you need it? Equate,
Right.
Of course, I do a spreadsheet, calculate everything out, and try to determine if the outlays are worth, the perceived benefit and what my return on investment is going to be. And those type of calculations are pretty simple. Am I replacing equipment? Is it going to allow us to generate more revenue? Is it going to reduce our costs? Because, if you look at the graph of owning a piece of equipment, it doesn't matter if it's a small piece of equipment like a computer printer, if it's a big truck like we had, big trucks, over the lifespan of that, over the useful life of that, that asset, the value of that asset is going to decline. And at the same time, the amount of time and effort you're going to spend, money-wise to maintain and repair that asset is going to go up. So that all just factors into, making that decision is, do I really need something new?
Right.
Do I have a piece of equipment that I'm replacing right now that I've had some significant repairs on, and the likelihood of those repairs, continuing is pretty high. So never am I just going to think, hey, I can save some money on my taxes by buying something new. I'm going to put it into the equation and try to see what makes the most sense. But will I time it, or have I in the past timed it so that it did happen near the end of the year? Sure. That's part of the whole equation as well. So.
Well, that's all we have for today. Thank you for joining us on Cashflow. If you have any cash flow questions, use #cashflow and find us on social media. Until next time.